this show, I am so excited to bring to you Sarahlyn Bruck. Sarahlyn, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jen.
I am so excited that you're here, and I would love for you to start with, how did you get into writing?
Oh my gosh. I think like many writers, I've been writing kind of my whole life. I started out as a reader. I love books. You ask my mom, she would say I spent a lot of time in my room reading. Just from the very beginning, I just absolutely loved it. And I thought, who gets to make these wonderful gifts? I thought that was just such a magical, it's almost like I don't know, they're like fairies or something. Who's doing this? How are you doing this? And it took a long time for me to figure out that I could be writing these stories too. But I did end up starting kind of writing on my own, maybe in, middle school and through high school. And then I got into theater, which is another form of storytelling. And then I really got back to it seriously after I had my daughter. So I was in my early 30s before I really started to think, oh, I'd really like to study this more closely, figure out what it is that story is and how to put together a plot and characters. And I haven't stopped. I just loved it.
Okay, I love that so much. And like you, I got into theater too. I did theater in
Oh,
high school. So
did you really?
yes, so I totally loved it. And it was so much fun. I also studied music growing up. So I studied piano and voice. So all of what you're
Oh,
describing are other ways of storytelling. And I love that you said that, because
mhm,
you can get inspiration because you're doing other creative activities. And
100%.
yeah. So when you were realizing, okay, this is something I really want to pursue,
Hmm.
and it's creative writing too,
Hmm.
where did you start? Like, did you say, like, I think I really want to learn a little bit more of how to structure the book, or like
Yeah.
structure a novel, and that aspect of the craft? Or did you say, you know what, how do I really get to know these characters better and study more character development type things? Because sometimes a writer might set out to say, I know I want to write this story, and I
Hmm.
know I need some support or some help, and I feel a little overwhelmed with all the resources out there.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of resources. I think when I started writing, just to backtrack a little bit, when I was getting my master's and I was writing my master's thesis, I was pregnant with my daughter and spending a lot of time on this longer piece. So I'd already written, like 10 or 20 page papers, but I'd never written anything that was like 100 pages or something. And it just sounded so daunting.
Mhm.
And when I finally finished that and I submitted it, I was like, oh, wow, I can actually write a long thing. It was literature analysis. It wasn't a novel or anything, but that gave me confidence in my writing and that I could actually put in the time and the focus. And I thought I might want to try a novel right away, but because I didn't really know how to structure a story, I ended up taking classes and learning from my wonderful, wonderful teachers at UCLA Extension. And I took a bunch of classes and figured it out and eventually started a novel that became kind of my learning novel. It was not going to see the light of day, but it was the novel that I really learned how to structure that story. I knew how to create those characters. And you might know this too, like from acting,
Mhm.
that really helped with my character development. I was really interested in getting into the heads of all of these different people and who were different from me, but also similar to me. And all of that was just so much fun.
Yes. And then whether I'm writing my own or whether I'm editing someone else's characters, like,
Hmm.
I will read it out loud, because
Mm.
that helps me to hear and feel the characters a little bit more. And am I, you know, picking up basically, what all of that is trying to communicate, and
Hmm.
being aware of my body too. Like, are my shoulders rolling back? Is my face,
Oh,
doing
yeah.
something to show like angry eyes or something? So
Yeah,
so
totally.
yeah, so because those are nuances that are showing up that you can reflect in your writing, but sometimes, like, acting it out helps me to feel the of the dimensions of the characters and the scene
Yeah.
in general. What do you thought? What are your thoughts there?
No, I agree. What did I think I read something somewhere where an author would read some of the dialogue in front of a mirror so that he
Mm.
could see his facial expressions. And I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't gone that far, um, but I am really, like here I am, I'm talking with my hands, like my characters will talk with their hands too. I love that you actually kind of embody each of the characters. And I do that too. I think about like, when, if we're in a sad scene, when does my chest hurt? Like when do I get a lump in my throat? When is it what does the feeling of disappointment feel like?
Mhm.
So those kinds of cues, just physical cues in my own body I find are really helpful when I'm writing character.
Yeah, yeah. And so, okay, so you made a really good point earlier when you said that, you know, this book was essentially like a learning novel, something to kind of, I would say, like kind of cut your teeth on it, just to get the
Mhm,
skills moving and see where it took you. So
mhm,
basically, what made you decide that I'm not going to publish this? Because someone who is working on that type of manuscript might feel like, oh my goodness, what do you mean you don't want to publish this piece? That almost might feel a little, you know, scary. Like, well, then how do I know that when this is ready for publish or taking it to the
mhm,
next step? What were your
mhm.
thoughts? What are your thoughts there?
Well, so that novel, so my first completed novel got me into Pitch Wars. Do you
Mm.
remember Pitch Wars?
Yeah.
And just for anybody who doesn't know, it's basically this writing contest. And for beginner writers or emerging writers, you have a finished manuscript, you submit it, and people who are, a few steps ahead of you, who may be agented or published or whatever, pick from the pile and they choose to mentor you over the course of a few months. And my manuscript got picked, and which was so exciting. That was so exciting. It was the first time that someone other than me was like taking this seriously. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So, and it made me take it more seriously. Like, oh, wow, somebody found something that they liked in this story. Anyway, worked with her on it. She's become a very good friend of mine, Margarita Montemore, and she's also done very well for herself in the publishing world too. But anyway, she plucked my manuscript from the pile. She mentored me. We worked on it really hard, and I learned, oh my God, I learned so much on that manuscript, not just learning how to finish something, but work with someone on it one-on-one, much like you would with an editor or a book coach,
Mhm.
one-on-one, and getting this feedback and starting to learn like, oh, what is resonating with me? What's right for this story and what's not right for this story? And by the time we were done, we submitted to a bunch of agents or whatever. There's, that's kind of the culminating
Mhm.
thing at the end. And I got no requests. I got
Oh.
0 requests for this manuscript that
Oh.
I had worked so hard on. And it was also a really good lesson. That was also an equally good lesson. You can work your buns off on something, and for whatever reason, it may not get the attention that
Mhm.
you had hoped for.
Mhm.
So I took the manuscript back and I considered working on it some more. And I did end up sending it out to agents and stuff. And when it came down to it, it was kind of a dystopian light type of book. And I called it speculative women's fiction. And a lot of people don't really know what to do with that, which was okay. But it took a long time for me to really learn that it doesn't mean that your manuscript is quote unquote bad. It can mean that maybe it's just not the right time for it. And for me, it meant I needed to go work on something else. I knew what I needed to do. And my next manuscript ended up being the first novel that I published, which was Designer You.
I love that. And that's not to say that the dystopian light, version doesn't come back through at another point in time. It might be
Sure.
that what was done was what you needed at that moment to help further cement this
Mhm,
desire to want to proceed, to continue with writing, to learn
mhm,
so much more. And then whenever you choose to, if you choose to revisit it, then it's a sense of going, okay, I've had a lot more experience now under my belt. What can I do with this? Can I shape this differently? Or is it, no, this really is a great story. And I don't know what else I could have done with it, but maybe
mhm.
now I can do something with it, or I choose another direction or what have you. But I don't think that whenever you work on a piece, that it's in vain, that
I
it's
agree.
wasted.
I totally agree with that. I think even if it's just it goes in a drawer, I it's always, I mean, and maybe that's just me, but I'm always learning something. Always,
Mhm.
always, always. And everything doesn't have to be published for it to be
Right.
a worthwhile activity. I absolutely learned so much. In fact, I probably learned more on that book than I have with all of the other books that saw the light of day. Uh, so I do think like that was no, I was so happy and I spent so much time on that book, but I'm really, really happy I went through that whole process, even though it's sitting on my hard drive.
Yeah, but to your point, you met someone, you built a wonderful relationship with them, you learned
Yes.
about the process and in different ways that that manuscript afforded that space. And so
Yes.
what I love what you're saying is the fact that you stayed open to those lessons, and and you gave yourself permission to say, okay, do I want to keep going with what I have, or do I need to try something different
Hmm.
and then come back to this later? And then again, the courage to try something different, because all
Yeah.
of those steps you did were also courageous. It was courageous to put yourself out in pitch wars. It was courageous to let this other person into your world and take feedback and grow in the writing, and courageous again to actively go with dealing with the agents, and then making that decision to say, let's go in another direction. So I think the thing that what I'm hearing so much in what you're saying, and I've heard so many times on with other episodes, is
Hmm.
really how I don't know how much a writer truly appreciates what how much courage and bravery it takes for them to keep showing up and doing their work and putting
Mm.
themselves out there,
Hmm.
especially when you hear all about the rejections, you hear all about the reviews or what have you,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
what feels like crickets, and you keep persevering. Well, pat yourself on the back for the
Aw.
steps you're taking.
You know what, though? It's funny. I mean, I'm really glad that in hindsight, that I was a bona fide grown up before I started doing all this stuff because I can handle rejection a lot better now as I just turned 52. So I can handle rejection in a much different way than I would have 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Oh my gosh. I mean, I just, I don't take any of that stuff personally. I think so much of it is about mindset. It's like, what can I, Pitch Wars, Pitch Wars ultimately was so over the top positive. I mean, just knowing all of those people that I met, I became part of a writing community,
I love
like that,
that.
which is so cool. And that's what they say to all writers is, oh, you got to find your people. You got to find your people. And I did overnight,
I love
that was
that.
so lucky.
Oh, I love that. I love that so, so much. So let's talk about some of those books that did come to the light of day, as you said. I know you shared with me before we started recording that there was a piece that you did publish, and then you ended up uh, basically getting the rights reverted back and
Mhm.
moving forward with it in a different way. And
Yeah.
I love that you did that. And I love that it panned out for you so smoothly and in such a beautiful way. And I was hoping you wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. My first book was published with a very small publisher, Crooked Cat Books. And it was
Okay.
basically a couple. They were kind of running the whole show and they were wonderful. I really, really liked them a lot. And my contract was only for 2 years from the date that I signed it. So I was able to get my rights back very quickly if I wanted to. And what happened was Crooked Cat decided to go in a different direction. So they decided to stop publishing basically the stuff that I write, which is book club fiction, women's fiction, and decided to really focus on like thrillers and crime fiction, that kind of stuff. And they even changed their name. So I got my rights back at the end of 2019 and decided to publish the book under my own imprint, which is its whole, that is a learning experience, but it was very easy. They were like, oh yeah, you can have the cover, you can have your book. It's all good. So I got my rights back and I was basically able to republish it under my own imprint without anyone really noticing. It was gone for a few weeks and then it popped back up again, and it looks the same. It's essentially the same book, but it's just now it's under my name, which is really cool. I did learn that it can be done, but it is a lot of work. And I knew then that I was really happy that I like working with a publisher. I knew like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this from scratch, write a book and then publish it myself, because it just takes so much time. I have some friends who love self-publishing because it gives them such a sense of control. Mm-hmm. And I don't want all that control. I really like having help getting that book out there, from the formatting of the text to, the cover. I mean, I don't mind having a say in that stuff. That's actually really nice, but I don't want to be doing it. I'd rather just focus on the writing part and share in the profits and all that kind of stuff with a really nice publishing company. So anyway, that was a good learning experience. And fortunately, the only reason why it had any legs at all was because it started with Crooked Cat, not because it started with me.
But I love that because, it sounds like because there was, a different direction, mm-hmm. that was really cool how that all worked out. And, mm-hmm. And even if somebody is in the space where they're not, it's a different situation, but they really feel like they need to do the rights reversal and move that back. What I would think of that is being true to yourself and honoring what you need each time. And my philosophy would be this: to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, did I conduct myself with dignity and grace in this entire time? And make that the focus. And am I moving towards something peaceful for all of us? Yeah. Because that's going to come through in all of what you're doing. And you can look at yourself and say, I've handled this well. And it sounds like that's really what, all of you did to help move that book forward. So I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was, their heart is in the right place. Yeah. They want that book to continue to do well. That's what they want, that. And they want that for their authors, whether they stuck with them or they moved on,
Yeah, I love that so much. So speaking of books, there's one behind you. And when this episode airs, it will be before this book. However, that is okay, because we can always oogle over the gorgeous cover, because it will be coming in 2024. But this is releasing in late 2023, this episode. So talk to me, Sarahlyn, about how the current book came to life, and especially because it's book club. What really delineates that, so our listeners kind of know what that really means, and how that kind of sets itself up a little differently than other fiction pieces?
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap, as you probably know, like with different genres and stuff. And book club fiction, this is or women's fiction. This one focuses on the lives of two women, two good friends, and it follows their journey. And it also covers some basic themes and problems that would be great for a book club discussion. You know what I mean? So this one talks about women's friendships. It talks about whether or not to hang on to a secret, when that's the right thing to do, when that's the wrong thing to do. It's about mistakes that we make when we're young. And so these kinds of themes really open up really interesting discussions among friends who love books.
But what I love about that is that my belief is that a book the writer has started the conversation, but the
Yeah.
reader finishes it and extends it further by revisiting it, because maybe they, when they read it in one space, they were in, one area of life or one mindset. And then maybe rereading it in a year and a half, 2 years, or what have you, it's a different experience because they are in a different experience. Or to your
Yeah.
point, they're sharing it with their friends. Like, you have to tell me what you thought about
Yeah.
XYZ when you get to it, or what have you. And so in your book, do you include questions to help prompt said club discussions?
So, because the book has not yet come out yet, I have not done the book club questions yet, but I will be posting book club questions on my website.
Nice.
So because I mean, I'm part of a book club. I love it. Even if we don't go over the questions, I love actually just kind of mulling over the questions that the author thought might be asked or might be discussed in a book club, because they may not be the ones that I necessarily as a reader would come up with. But I actually really liked your point about how a book that an author writes isn't necessarily the book that the reader reads. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those, I like to think of a book becoming the readers. After it's out in the world, it's kind of no longer the author's in a way. It really becomes the audience's book. And that the most fun for me is when someone reads my book and they think the character was like this or whatever. And I would think, oh, I didn't even think about that. Like, that's amazing. I love that. I love it when a reader can interpret something that I didn't intend, but it doesn't make it any less true.
I love that. I love that. And staying open with that, because to your point, when you are the writer and you're working on it, and yes, you have a vision, you have a direction you're going, you see where you want to take your characters and your readers. But I love what you said, that once you've published it, it's out in their hands and
Yeah.
it's up for interpretation in that
Yeah.
way. And so going back to something you said earlier, and somewhat of this interpretation piece, you
hmm
mentioned about, like, the feedback and being able to not let it get to you and not take it personal.
hmm
So book is out into the world, readers are reading it,
hmm
and maybe not all readers resonate for whatever reason. And in some
hmm
cases it could be they tried, this wasn't a genre they were interested in, and so be it, it's okay. But how
Yeah.
would you advise a writer who maybe they've seen a few reviews, or a few maybe that have come in back to back or what have you,
hmm
that really just aren't making their hearts sing for whatever the reason? These
Yeah.
reviews they're kind of starting to get to them a little bit, and they just kind of
Yeah.
feel like, okay, this is great. Do I even want to continue with, I was going to write a sequel to this one, or I was in the middle of
Oh,
writing, or I was going to work
yeah.
on this other, and this is starting to get to me. How
Yeah.
would you help them to kind of work through that?
Oh, that's such a good, kind question. I think it's really just take care of yourself, take care of your mental health. If it is not healthy for you to go to Goodreads and look at those reviews, then stay off of it. Maybe if you have a partner who can sift through and see if there's anything helpful. I think that reviews can often be really helpful, whether they're good or bad or in
Mhm.
between. But if it's not good for your mental health, it's not going to be helpful for you anyway. So I tend to kind of stay off of Goodreads. I don't even think that that's really for me anyway. It's kind of like I also teach at the college level. And so there's a rate my professors, which I will never go on. I don't need that because it's not for me. It's for students. And either they're going to complain about me or they're going to say they love me. And either extreme is not helpful for me,
Mhm.
And so Goodreads, I don't need to go on Goodreads and read a bunch of reviews. I'll have my husband every now and then go on and see if there's anything helpful. But otherwise, yeah, I feel like just listen to your heart, listen to your mental health. If it's something that causes you any kind of mental anguish, you don't need that. It's not
Yeah.
helpful.
And to your point, let's say you have somebody look at them, or you choose to, and you see some things that probably could are helpful, and
Hmm.
you're in a better space to receive that
Hmm.
information. What would you suggest that they do if they can take that constructive, and it's provided it was constructive, but they can take
Hmm.
that feedback? What would you suggest they do with it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, because reviews, I tend to leave reviews, for all the books that I love. I don't leave reviews for any books that I don't finish or I don't love, which is just my personal way of doing it. But if a review comes in and it's particularly, I don't know, spiteful or, just for example, I don't like books about actresses. My second book is about an actress. So, okay. But I think it's important to realize that people who leave these reviews are in their own mental space too, and it says maybe more about the reviewer, whatever the review is, than it does about the book.
Yeah.
But if it is about, I wish that they hadn't rushed the end, or, if I can see that there's might be a pattern of certain feedback, then I might go, oh, they actually have a point there, and that might be something I might kind of put it back in my mental file and take out again when I'm drafting my next book.
Yeah, to your point, there might be something in there that's about the craft in
Hmm.
particular that you can leverage even more, so that some things
Hmm.
might be a personal preference,
Hmm.
but in other cases, you really might see something that's hitting about the craft in and of
Hmm.
itself. And when you can tease out those nuggets, that will help strengthen your writing.
Yeah.
And even if it's one of those going, I've heard, maybe I rushed the ending, of my previous book. I want to make sure I'm, not just, you know, being mindful of that moving forward on my next piece, but maybe that's a question that you write down for your beta readers to say, how did you feel about the ending?
Yeah.
Like you get a very specific question that you use to work with your editors, or you use and ask
Hmm.
your betas, because you can use that information and reframe it as a question to ask when
Hmm.
when you are asking for feedback in particular.
Hmm.
So I like what
Yeah.
you're.
But it's also like you point out, like you have beta readers, you have an editor, and these are really people that I absolutely trust. Even if I disagree with them sometimes, I absolutely trust them. And so those will be my first, that's who I listen to for the most part. And I love anyone who wants to review my books. But for the most part, where I'm getting my feedback is from my beta readers and my editors.
That's a really good point, that you're being mindful about what you need to be able to write a successful piece and to feel
Mhm.
good about what you're putting out into the world, and then going back and working with that team, that maybe it's that same team, maybe it's a little different team for the next book, but
Mhm.
it's still, you've basically done the due diligence to say, I believe these are the right people to help me with this particular manuscript. So when you're identifying beta readers, for instance, who might really like thrillers, and
Right.
and you're writing, like you said, women's fiction, are they going to really, are they the right beta reader for this particular piece?
Exactly.
Unless they say, no, I really love all kinds. Just because I pick up a thriller
Mhm.
all the time does not mean I don't love a good women's fiction. Give it to me.
Mhm.
Great. You know what? Great. But if you know that the genre is completely off, then be mindful of that when you're asking for your betas too.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you want someone to read for something very particular, like
Yeah.
if I have a character who is very different from me, or a different ethnicity than me or something like that, I'll have someone read in particular just to make sure I'm getting this right. Like
Good.
going back to the actor character, she's in a soap opera, and I had someone who was in a soap opera read the book and let me know what was right and what I was getting wrong and how I could fix that. So that kind of thing is also really, really helpful.
Yeah, very much so. So I have loved this conversation. This has been so much fun and so
Me
helpful. And I
too.
cannot wait for your book, Light a Fire, to get out into the world. Sarahlyn, where can people connect with you and where can they get your books?
You can get my books everywhere. My imprint is an Amazon publishing imprint. Don't let that fool you. You can get it on Amazon, but you can get it anywhere. It's available in paperback. It's available in all ebook formats as well as audio. And you can find me at sarahlynbruck.com. Instagram is my favorite social media platform, and Facebook at Sarahlyn Bruck. So just if you know my name, you can pretty much find me anywhere.
Awesome, Sarahlyn. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Jen.